from Goalpost Studios in downtown East Lansing, Michigan,
Hello and welcome to the Earn More, Keep More show.
where it's our job to give you tips, tricks, and strategies to earn more and keep more. I'm Dave McAndrews, and I believe that we should focus our marketing on messages that are all about our clients so that we can connect with them in a way that they can understand.
And I'm Matt Love, and I believe in being efficient with our companies so that we are able to keep more of what we make.
Me up beautifully, and that's why I stay plugged in, and I always contribute to my community.
I think we have an answer for a question we asked way back on one of the first episodes, and that is, what would be the rules for the Earn More, Keep More drinking game?
Yeah.
The key to the Earn More, Keep More drinking game is the word absolutely.
Absolutely.
Because myself especially, but you as well, when somebody says something that we agree with, we do things like say, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And so if you're playing along at home, we encourage you to grab your favorite beverage or tonic.
That's right.
And play along with the Earn More, Keep More home drinking game or drinking game home edition. All right, and we are back to the Earn More, Keep More show. We are back in the home offices in East Lansing, Michigan.
Beautiful East Lansing, Michigan.
Beautiful East Lansing, Michigan. And there is a very important date coming up on the calendar for most business owners. It's circled in red for blood.
Oh.
It is tax day.
Tax day.
So tax day, April 15th, and this is going to be our tax day special. So give you something to think about, marinate on, and really help understand a little bit more about taxes. And because our standpoint is Uncle Sam's going to get his.
They have to.
Uncle Sam's going to get his, but he really should not get more than he necessarily needs to.
Well, I hear this thing thrown out all the time about their fair share. So the wealthy should, quote unquote, pay their fair share in taxes. I'm all for it. The question is, who defines what their fair share is, right? So we have a little bit of the history of the tax code.
I think that depends on if you're wealthy or not. So if you're not wealthy, their fair share is definitely they, them.
They, them.
And if you do have a little bit of money in your pocket, then their fair share is definitely, are you sure that should be me? Because I'm not sure it should be me.
I totally agree. So get this. Would you be surprised to know that what you just said is actually not that accurate, according to the IRS?
No, what did I just say?
You said that if you have money, then you're wealthy. Wrong. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It matters how much you show on your income tax return.
So you were saying that having money and having income, very different things.
Totally different. So so the narrative from the politician's perspective is, tax the wealthy their fair share. So the question is, how does the IRS or the government determine who's wealthy? I use quotations because most people who are wealthy, according to the IRS, do not know that they're wealthy in their own lifestyle. And the reason is this. You mentioned, you could have a bunch of money, but you could have a bunch of money if it's in the right spot. You're not considered wealthy. See, the income tax is always due. But what you do with your dollar after you pay your income tax will determine how many taxes you pay going forward. And it also determines if the government considers you wealthy or not.
So Earn More, Keep More 101. If you want to keep more, you have to know what to do with your money after you earn it, after you put it through the funnel of the IRS, through the income tax.
That's right.
Pay your fair share as according to the income tax code, but stop there and do something a little bit different with your money.
Yeah, absolutely. Pay your fair share according to the government. And we will let the government decide what our fair share is. It has nothing to do with what we believe. It's who's in office.
I was a history teacher in a former incarnation of myself.
Yeah.
Straight out of college, I was a history teacher. I don't know why they let me be a history teacher. I knew a few things. I did okay, but I did not know anything about taxes or the tax code, even though I was also a economics teacher, which is more problematic. Maybe.
You didn't have like a tax 101 class in economics? How do you have an economics degree?
No, I have a history degree.
History degree. You had economics classes in college, right?
Yes.
And there was no taxation classes?
I mean, we talked about taxes. We talked about the macroeconomic implications of tax policy, but we definitely did not talk about the individualized, personalized tax code and how that worked. So 1913, a law was passed that made income tax legal and created the income
Actually,
tax.
in 1913, they passed a temporary law saying that we are going to temporarily tax your income.
Temporarily forever.
Temporarily tax your income. It's just for a couple of years, just until we get back on our feet. But we have a lot of expenditures. The United States is growing so much. We need help from its citizens to help pay for a lot of the infrastructure that we're building. So it was a temporary idea in 1913.
And then very shortly after 1913, there was a pretty big event in the world. It was the First World War. And America, of course, back-to-back World War champs.
Yep.
If you look at the rates that happened directly as almost a result of going into those world wars, it's pretty shocking to me, because if you look at the graphic when they first passed this temporary measure,
What was it, the rate? 15%?
15%.
Above X amount of income?
Right. So 15%, and then as soon as the United States gets embroiled into World War I, we jack it way the heck up. And let's go ahead and
67% tax.
67%. And that was in a matter of less than 5 years. The government was like, we need a little bit of help, 15%. And then all the way up to 67% with World War I. But that wasn't even the highest.
Yeah. Well, then a war happens, and the government says, we need a little bit of help. So they jump from 15 to 67.
And here's kind of a philosophical question. Does the war happen, or does America happen within the war as a result of what's happening in the world? Or does it happen as a result of, oh, we have all of this money to go fight a war? It's a different way to look at things.
Totally different. Now, what the government did back then for the First and Second War was buy products made by American companies.
Sure.
So they would invest back in the American economy, created a ton of jobs. Now, the question is then, it's like they're taking money from the producers and then buying back productivity from those same producers. So it does spark a little bit of an economic growth. Is that sustainable? It depends on what happens with the investment from the United States government, because the war ended up slowing down a few years later.
Sure.
And now the economy is booming, but at the same time, those manufacturers that made all of those things needed for the war, the government, the buyer, slowed down. They don't need all that stuff anymore, the artillery, the tanks, all that stuff. And so now what happens to the economy? The economy ends up kind of slowing down. So then the tax rates ended up kind of going down a little bit at the same time too.
Sure. So the 1920s, the roaring 20s, tax rates go back to a much lower level. And then after the 20s, the Depression happens. And then for the 10 people in America who were still earning money during the Depression, they jack it way the heck back up.
Well, let's talk about that real quick.
Yeah.
You're skipping over.
Sure.
Not to minimize it, though, because after the war, people come back from fighting, and then the home front is happy because their brothers and fathers, and they're back in the American economy. They're going to start producing. So we have all these abled bodies, and the economy does continue to boom because everyone is so eager to rebuild off of what they did. So the government lowered taxes from 67. It went down quite a bit, dropped 25%.
Dropped to 25%.
Yeah, dropped to 25%. I mean, that's more than a 50% decrease, 60% decrease.
So the interesting part of this small slice of history is the fact that you will get your social leaning or socialist leaning candidates today pointing back to this period of history and saying, because there was no regulation, because taxes were low, the economy gets way overheated, and that precedes the Great Depression, and the Great Depression happens almost as a result of doing really well. But there's a lot more to that story.
There is a lot more, because there's history books,
geopolitics, sure.
But there's also what caused the Great Depression, and there was a giant market crash. of all the listeners, who here could literally stand up in front of a crowd for 20 minutes and talk about what the stock market is? I bet you there's less than 3% of listeners right now that could talk about what is it? What's the stock market? We are taught to invest in companies that sell shares of their company on a place called Wall Street, where you and I just were.
Right.
And we have no control over how that company is actually going to do. So as the economy is booming, where people are coming back, they're investing again into Wall Street, and the growth is massive because all these people are buying. When people are buying, price goes up. Well, the money never existed. So when a couple of people needed their money back, that caused the collapse. Now all of that fake money that never really technically existed was exposed, and that's what it just came tumbling down. And who felt it? Middle America.
Right, because now a lot of those companies that may or may not have been directly affected by the stock market, they now have been devalued. They lose the ability to produce. The jobs get cut, and when jobs get cut anywhere, that's felt on Main Street.
So think about this: in 1932, right in the heart of the Great Depression, stock market crashed.
29.
Yep, 29. People are losing their jobs all over America. Government still needs money. They raised taxes in 1932 to 63% on their top income earners.
Right. For the 10 people in America who are still earning money, it went up to 63%.
Exactly. So they are going to define, there's two ways they can raise taxes. They can raise the tax rate from 25 to 63%. But then in reality, they can also change the margins at which income level do you have to be at to hit whatever level that you're at. So if they could keep taxes right at 25% for anything above $2 million of income, for example. Or they could say, all right, we're going to keep taxes at 25% on anything above $50,000 of income, which affects a heck of a lot more people. And it had nothing to do with the success of these individuals. It had to do with, all right, everybody's scrambling right now to make some money, including the IRS and the government.
Yeah, they had programs to fund.
Wouldn't it be nice to be able to just charge more if you needed more money?
That would be nice.
Okay, rule number 1 and earn more. If you want to earn more, just charge your consumer more than what you're charging them right now.
Just charge more.
And see how sustainable that is. And if it's not sustainable in your business, how could it be sustainable in the government?
Absolutely. By the way, back to the drinking game. That's your first. Absolutely.
There you go.
Yeah. Now I'll probably catch it. So basically, we have the 1930s. The rates go up significantly. They go back up into actually the 80s and the 90% for the highest income earners. And then another big event happens. World War II. Remember, America, back-to-back World War champs. America. And post-war, America really did not have a whole lot of competition from the rest of the world because of the fact that the Allies were basically rebuilding. Let's
think about that.
Sure.
Our country didn't experience the war physically.
Right.
We bombed. They blew up parts of other nations.
Mm-hmm.
They had rebuilding to do. We didn't have rebuilding infrastructure-wise. We had building from scratch. They had to rebuild, which is totally different. So that's kind of helped us.
Right. And gave us a tremendous advantage competitively on the world stage.
Completely.
And interestingly, the 90% or 80% highest tax rate, a lot of that money was going toward the rebuilding of other countries.
Yeah.
So the Marshall Plan in Germany, the rebuilding of Japan, and getting all of those countries back into a place where you would not have a post-war collapse like you saw in Germany post-World War I. Because after World War I, Germany was in terrible condition. The world kind of stuck it to them for starting World War I. And everyone thought that you have to do it differently after World War II. You have to build them up. And so a lot of the money that was being raised back in the U.S. and a lot of the prosperity, I mean, the boom, the baby boom generation was basically born in the late 40s and the 50s after World War II. And that wealth began to move around the world in an interesting way.
There's other adjectives that people might use other than interesting, but yeah, it was definitely interesting.
And The problem today is we look at it with 2019 eyes, and in a political climate where it is very difficult, if you are of conservative persuasion, to look at spending money anywhere else in the world as a good thing. But post World War II, it was a very important thing, and it also helped to bring about some of the American prosperity that the latter half of the 20th century took place in that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So, but let's get straight back to the tax code. So basically, the taxes during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the highest percentage rate never dips below 70%.
With a little asterisk here, the highest tax ever was in 1944 at 94%. Now, can you imagine giving 94% of your paycheck to the government? And one listening might say, and this is a common theme if anyone's listening.
How much am I making before that? Because I can think of a scenario where I'd be okay with that, but it's a lot of zeros in my
A lot of zeros. And this is what I want the listeners to understand. Remember in the beginning, wealth is not defined by how much money you have. Wealth is defined by how much money you make. Okay? Income defines your wealth. In 1944...
Defines your wealth for the IRS.
For the IRS. And let's be honest, that's all that matters.
Well, that's all that matters for them to know.
Exactly. Yeah.
You want to have more wealth, but you want that wealth to be post-tax.
Post-tax. Yeah. I mean, legally off the radar screen of the IRS for income tax purposes. Yeah, I'm all for that. What people don't understand, though, is that everyone says they should tax the wealthy. So here's just a real quick example. Then I want to get into what you're going towards. 94% tax rate on anything above $200,000 of income in 1944. Now, here's the thing. Most people might go, 94%, that's ridiculous. But who's making $200,000 a year in 1944? Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was an actor back in the 40s. He lived in California. So here's a quick story. He would make 2 movies a year. He'd get paid $100,000 a movie. So he'd work for 6 months, make 2 movies, and then he'd go back to the ranch and do nothing. Why? Because if he worked...
He was Ronald Reagan. He was doing ranch stuff.
He was doing ranch stuff. If he made another movie that year, and you add in the state income tax for the state of California, you follow me?
Mm-hmm.
It's an 8% state tax back then. So every $100,000 he made on top of the $200,000,
he owed 103%.
He's good at, not only is he cute, he's good at math. Did you guys get that?
Numbers.
He would owe more income tax than he made in income. So he said, I'm not working. He'd go back to the ranch and hang out. And then when he became president, this is kind of going back to where you're going with this, from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the highest tax bracket never went below 70% until he was president. He changed the entire tax code. But yeah, you keep going where you're going with this.
And he changed the entire tax code primarily because of everything that he had learned through this entire process.
And what he learned was there's no incentive to just go out and kill it. I don't want to have a $10 million a year because the government might take more than I even make. It's not only could it happen, it's already happened in our history. So where's the incentive to do really well?
And Ronald Reagan became a disciple of an economist by the name of Frederick von Hayek.
Yeah.
Not to be confused with Selma Hayek, totally different family.
Totally different. But anybody listening at home, absolutely.
Absolutely. So Frederick von Hayek wrote a very important book called The Road to Serfdom. And in that book, and hate to break anything to our good friends, the Bernie Sanders supporters, things like that, but if you are a strong Bernie Sanders supporter and understand that the socialist agenda or the having that mentality, it's very important to also have in your locker an understanding of what are some of the things that maybe go beyond, well, we should provide some really good things for people who are less fortunate than us.
I'm not against that.
So the book is Road to Serfdom.
Yeah.
And it's a fairly short book. it was very influential for both Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain at the time.
Yeah.
And both of them understood that the socialist agenda, which basically says take money from the wealthy, redistribute it in a governmental way. And if you know anything about the government, you know that the government runs things in a pretty inefficient way. So it is very difficult to make the argument that if I as a business person take my money, hand it over to the government, they're going to do way better with it than I would have.
Yeah.
In terms of taking care of my employees, and in terms of taking care of my community, all of those things.
Yeah.
So that book did a lot to really shape his worldview, and basically went in contrast to Milton Friedman and the supply side or the part of the economic theory that basically you can have the government priming the pump for the entire economy, and everybody experiences or can live a more wealthy lifestyle because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he comes into office, he makes those changes. The highest tax rates go down very significantly, and they went down to, what was it there?
28%.
So 28% down from the highs in the 90s in the middle of the century. So 28%. And then, so if we look at the graph here.
Well, let me tell a quick story.
Go ahead.
While you're going. If I make $100,000 today, I am in the top 10% of income in the country.
Top 10.
Top 10. So anybody who's listening right now, if your goal is to be to 100,000 of income, congratulations. Mine is too. You will be in the top 10% of income earners. Here's why that's a problem. You now are considered the wealthy by the IRS. So think about this. You make $100,000 today, you're in a 22% tax bracket, at least at the time of this recording. 22% tax bracket. Go back to 1982. That was the year that I was born. If you account 3% for inflation, $100,000 today would feel like about $40,000 of income in 1982. If I made 40 grand in 1982, I'm in a 39% tax bracket. We are in a relatively low tax environment compared to the rest of where America came from. I don't think people realize that. And when we say things like we need to tax the wealthy, newsflash, you make six figures, you're the wealthy. You are the wealthy.
And for most business owners, really a lot of business owners, if they weren't making over $100,000 a year, they would run a daily risk of being bankrupt.
Yeah, I mean, think
about
it.
Just because of the thinness of margins and all of those things. You need a decent amount of cushion in order to operate a business, especially in a highly regulated environment.
Totally. I meet people literally every day that they make 100,000, 150, and they don't feel like they're wealthy. But according to the IRS, they are. And when you listen to I'm sure this is where we're going here too, but the future of what's going to happen with taxation in America, it doesn't matter how much money you have. It matters how much you make. And I think the biggest problem that I see, I don't want to turn this into a political podcast here because we're talking about saving money and understanding taxes, but if the young people understand that if they get what they want and they make a good income, they are the ones paying the 70% income tax that AOC and Bernie Sanders and all these people want. It's happened in it's happened in the past. It could happen in the future. The problem is that they might get what they want. So at 21, 25, 28 years old, we're talking about, we need to tax the wealthy. Guys, this is what you want to achieve. 100,000 of income? You want to pay 70% tax at 100 grand of income?
And I think this is one of the interesting points for kind of the climate we live in right now, is that a lot of the movement, kind of the very left progressive movement, does not understand any of the history behind why we're at where we're at, which is one of the reasons why, as someone who was a history teacher, I find it very important to understand how did we get here to where we are?
Yeah, it's
what
so
were the
important.
things
So
what
important.
were the things that have made the United States very successful over the years, and where are those danger areas? And I think whenever you look at something like a 70% tax rate for the highest income earners, and again, defining the highest income earners as what most people by just about any standard would say, that's just earning a good living.
Yep.
It's not uber wealthy. It's not Jeff Bezos.
Well, the biggest misconception, too, is the Bernie Sanders followers believe Bernie Sanders when he says we need to tax the billionaires their fair share.
You got to really emphasize the billionaires, the Brooklyn. Get the Brooklyn in it.
There is not more than a few hundred billionaires. There might be 1,000 billionaires in the country. You cannot tax your way into prosperity. It can't happen.
Which is
and when
exactly
he talks about taxing,
the road to serfdom.
Yes, exactly. And when he talks about taxing people that are successful, taxing the wealthy, it's based on income. So when you get the raise you want at your next job, watch your paycheck and the amount of taxes that get taken out each paycheck. And imagine that were a 70% tax, meaning you only keep 3 out of the 10 days that you've earned go back into your paycheck. 7 out of the 10 days that you work, those go to the government. Is that really what we want? The scary part is that we're coming from that, and that's where everyone talks about where we're going to head to. And relatively speaking, right now we're actually in a low tax bracket environment.
So the low tax environment, you keep mentioning that. What are, keeping on the keep more theme, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how can we take advantage of the fact that we have a low tax environment and get ourselves in position? Because that's essentially everybody who listens to this show. They want to figure out how can they earn more, and then how can they keep more, and how do we make sure that you don't repatriate that same money back to the government.
You don't know what you don't know.
You want to keep more, understand where taxes have been, understand where you want to go as an individual, and then understand where you think taxes will be when and if you get there. So if we are in this relatively low tax bracket environment, learn the tax code. Work with a CPA that does tax planning, not tax returns. Ask the CPA, where will I be in the future? Where will the government be in the future? And what can I do today to minimize my tax liability forever? Not just this year. How can I limit my tax liability for the rest of my life? That question is so priceless. It's priceless. And the interesting part, people listening, hopefully they're going, holy cow, I've never really asked my CPA, how do I reduce my tax liability forever? Usually they just do it in the year you file your tax return. Newsflash, that is so easy for a CPA. They don't even study anymore. They do your tax return, deduct, defer. Here you go. Talk with someone who understands tax planning so that you'll never file a tax return in retirement rather than be susceptible to whatever Bernie and AOC and the Democratic Socialists are voting for.
the Democratic Socialists?
I use quotations because if you listen to their definition of democratic socialism,
it's just socialist.
It's the opposite of even socialism. Right. They don't understand what socialism is. They call socialism the power, giving power to the people, the social republic, which it isn't. And here's proof that socialists don't understand socialism. Imagine you being in second grade and you have a homework assignment and the teacher hands out 25 pencils, but there's 27 students in the class. So 2 people don't get a pencil. Who do those 2 people go to try and get a pencil? The other students? Social? Or do they go back to the teacher and say, teacher, I didn't get a pencil?
The teacher.
Teacher. In that example, it's just like government. The government dictates who gets what. Socialists think it's all about, today's socialists think it's all about like giving power to the people. It's not. You're giving power to the government, and the government says, we are going to determine who gets what based on your income. Like, this is where everything ties together. You want to be successful, and if you get successful, the government gets to determine how much you keep and how much you have to give away. What's the purpose of being successful then?
Go back to the ranch.
It makes ranching sound fun, doesn't
Go
it?
hang out at the ranch.
That's right. I'm glad that we had a chance to talk about taxes. So on the website, we'll have a tax chart of the history of the tax brackets, right? Is that what you're thinking?
Yep, absolutely.
So we'll have all the history.
Absolutely. There you go.
And we'll show where we are today relative to where we have been. And if they want more information, where the key part is too, is that graph will show the different tax rates at each given year. If you want to learn more, just send us an email and ask what thresholds, bumped you up into those different tax brackets.
so you can figure out how to stop working.
Exactly.
When to stop working for the year.
Well, here's the thing.
I'm hoping to be done by June this year.
Here's the takeaway.
Everybody here wants to earn more. If you're listening to the episode, you want to learn how to earn more. How you keep more is how to control what you give to the IRS. Now, this isn't tax evasion, it's tax avoidance. There's 70-some thousand pages in the tax code to understand. It's our job to understand how we utilize those pages. So, understanding how the tax code is written and where our opportunities lie is crucial. If you want to keep more, learn how to not give away your earnings. It's very simple.
Seems like.
It seems like it.
Let's do it. Well, appreciate you joining us this week. Sorry, but next week is tax day. So go ahead and warm up those pens and get those checks out to the IRS so that Uncle Sam stays away from auditing and doing all those fun things to you.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Bye now.
Drop the mic.
Well, thank you for listening to the Earn More, Keep More show. Do not forget to hit that subscribe button below so that you can make sure you're up to date on all the new episodes. And if you want to be a guest, we would love to hear from you. On our website, we have an easy downloadable form where you can put in your information and share with us your experience of how you've turned a problem into a process.
We are all about our listeners, and we want to make sure that our listeners are finding a place. And we are most excited for you guys to share with us how you are earning more and keeping more. We look forward to hearing from you.
This has been a Goalpost production.
That's it for us. We are your hosts, Dave McAndrews and Matt Love. Our executive producer and creative guru is Jennifer McKinstry. Our social media director is Mark Farnes. And a very special thank you to Lansing's own Jose Moore for providing the music.
Thanks for listening.